Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is January 13th, 2026.
And we have a lot to get through today.
We really do.
Yeah.
If you've been watching the headlines, you know the geopolitical landscape. And, well, our own domestic situation here in the U.S. are currently defined by two explosive and, frankly, terrifying factors. Unparalleled domestic chaos on one hand, and on the other, a rapid, almost reckless escalation of foreign policy that respects neither historical precedent nor, it seems, any legal constraints.
Right.
It truly feels like we are watching the established order crumble in real time, and that collapse is being actively managed.
It's more than just a feeling of collapse. It's a pivotal juncture where the global and the domestic systems are converging. Today really marks the point where the administration's aggressive actions abroad are directly mirrored by what's happening at home.
Mirrored how, exactly?
Well, look at the preparations for a potential Iran strike, the rhetoric coming out of the White House, and this perceived triumph in Venezuela. That's being directly reflected in the expansion of the domestic security and surveillance state right here on American streets. We're seeing it with the aggressive actions of federal agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE.
And the technology.
And the deployment of powerful new phone tracking technology that just sidesteps basic civil liberties entirely.
That convergence, as you describe it, that's the game changer, isn't it?
Has to be.
Our stack of sources, these highly specialized reports we've been digging through, they suggest this isn't some accidental policy drift. It seems to be a strategic attempt by the oligarchy to prevent internal revolution.
How? By starting fires everywhere else.
Exactly, by instigating external wars and internal cultural conflict. This whole operation feels designed, essentially, to distract the populace from the fundamental economic fragility of this country.
And the debt. You can't forget the debt.
The massive surging debt, which currently stands at an eye-watering $30 trillion.
Exactly. The convergence is the strategy. The ruling class understands that perpetual distraction is the key to stability for them. They benefit immensely from a civil war scenario.
And you don't mean a literal shooting war?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
But an ideological, a cultural war, because it successfully prevents the populace from recognizing the true enemy.
Right.
If people are busy fighting each other over an issue like immigration or a police shooting in Minneapolis, they won't engage in a revolution against the economic system and the debt machine that is crushing their quality of life.
So the internal conflict is basically the moat protecting the elite.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, let's try to unpack this dizzying array of events. We're tackling a stack of highly specialized reports about Iran's recently failed protest operation, the White House's unprecedented threats of military action, the terrifyingly expanding power of federal agents on our streets.
And the larger geoeconomic game driving all of it, a game that really determines who controls the world's capital moving forward.
So our mission today is to distill the hard data, the specific names, the dates, and these incredibly complex geopolitical strategies that are underway.
And we have to separate the pervasive propaganda that we hear 24/7, the rhetoric of democracy and freedom, from the hard hidden truth of what is actually being executed by these incredibly powerful interests right now.
We need to understand the mechanisms of control,
both kinetic and technological. Let's start with Iran.
Let's do it. Let's start overseas in Iran, because this story has just exploded in the last week, and much of the mainstream narrative about some spontaneous protest movement seems to be falling apart under rigorous scrutiny.
It's completely collapsing.
Our sources detail the apparent and definitive collapse of a large-scale, externally backed proxy operation, one designed to induce regime change.
This was clearly not some organic student uprising. The hard data in these reports, it strongly suggests this was a very carefully prepared operation extending back many months.
Maybe even to June of last year, 2025?
Possibly. And the core piece of evidence here, the fact that elevates this from rumor to a high-level destabilization op, is the staggering figure of 40,000 Starlink terminals.
40,000?
40,000 terminals that were allegedly smuggled into Iran.
Just for context, that is an extraordinary number. We're talking about a military-grade logistical challenge to move that volume of equipment into a hostile environment that's under tight surveillance. What does that figure tell us?
It tells us two things. First, it wasn't cheap. This represents a massive multi-million-dollar logistical and financial investment. And second, it required high-level intelligence coordination.
So who was behind it?
The analysis points directly to foreign involvement. Specifically, it cites that this complex operation was led by a joint effort of Mossad, MI6, and the CIA.
The big three.
The big three. This wasn't a spontaneous movement. This was a sophisticated, highly resourced effort to destabilize a sovereign government. It was designed to ensure that the protest movements could communicate, coordinate, and stay anonymous despite the Iranian government's existing digital surveillance capabilities.
But what's fascinating here is how the entire operation, despite that massive investment, seemingly failed in the last week.
It imploded.
And it seems the architects of this whole thing failed to account for the technical expertise of Iran's allies.
That's the critical pivot point. The Russians. They have extensive real-world experience dealing with Starlink jamming in Ukraine, where, the Ukrainian military's communications rely so heavily on that service.
Right.
They provided critical technology and expertise to the Iranians.
Yeah.
This was a direct military-grade countermeasure.
And that assistance, that appears to have been the game changer, the element the operations planners didn't expect. The sources detail how the Russians and the Chinese were instrumental in defeating the use of Starlink by these opposition groups. So how did that technical countermeasure actually work on the ground?
Well, essentially, Starlink operates by beaming these localized signals from space, which can be hard to block entirely. But the Russian and Chinese counter-technology, likely a combination of sophisticated geolocation software and focused signal degradation. It just choked the communications of the protest groups.
It cut them off.
Completely.
Yeah.
It's reported that this technology enabled Iranian authorities to quickly locate and isolate them by identifying the geographical clusters where the Starlink signals were originating.
Wow.
And over the course of the last week, this technical capability allowed the authorities to systematically break the back of the protests. The foreign-backed communication lifeline was severed.
The evidence of failure is now so clear that even filtered reports can't hide it. We have multiple reports indicating the situation in Western Iran was very calm and that the protests have really died off.
Yeah.
Yet we still see Western media trying to maintain this tired narrative that the riots are still active and large scale.
It's pure desperation from the propaganda machine. It flies directly in the face of what observers who rely on non-Western sources were seeing on the ground just 48 hours ago.
And the collapse of this proxy operation leads directly to the question of who exactly was rounded up. If this was a foreign-led effort, who was leading the charge internally?
This is where the allegations of outright treason surface.
According to the analysis by former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter, a figure known for his deep and sometimes controversial geopolitical analysis, those rounded up by Iranian authorities are not simply innocent demonstrators.
No. Ritter claims they are Mossad agents, CIA agents actively working to bring down a sovereign government.
And that they had specific instructions on targets.
Right. And these instructions were not simply chant slogans. They were tangible actions like burning banks, attacking police stations, and actively creating unrest designed to induce a violent state response.
This is where we see the political cover in the West trying to obscure that aggressive intent. We hear a consistent message from U.S. political figures. Figures as disparate as President Trump and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Both saying they have to help the Iranian people.
Exactly. Professor Mohammad Marandi, a prominent geopolitical analyst specializing in Iranian affairs, argues that this whole notion of help is actually a transparent front for external aggression.
Well, he specifically critiques the idea that this is some bipartisan effort for human rights.
Right.
He points out the political hypocrisy. He says that AOC, despite positioning herself as a left-wing progressive Democrat, ultimately supports empire by consistently voting to fund the Israeli regime.
So his argument is that in the realm of foreign policy and empire, the U.S. political establishment functions as a unified party.
A uniparty, yes. Regardless of their domestic disagreements on social spending or whatever, they present a united front when it comes to funding and supporting aggression in the Middle East. And they use the humanitarian angle as political camouflage.
Professor Marandi also presents a strong counter-narrative about the Iranian regime's domestic legitimacy, which is essential to understand why the protests failed.
He points to the massive counter-protests in cities like Esfahan and Shiraz.
Right.
And he says this demonstrates a very high degree of legitimacy for the Iranian state, a fact that fundamentally contradicts the Western narrative used to justify aggression.
His point being, If the regime were truly hated, truly hanging by a thread like the Western media claims, it couldn't possibly have mustered those massive organic crowds, especially not under severe economic siege.
Exactly. That legitimacy argument destroys the pretext for external action. But even with the proxy operation failing, Trump is moving forward.
He's pivoting.
He's pivoting from covert action to overt economic and military threats, bypassing diplomacy entirely.
Okay, let's shift to that. The economic and military escalation coming directly from Washington. President Trump issued an order imposing an effective immediately 25% tariff
on any country doing business with the Islamic Republic.
This is a declaration of economic warfare.
Absolutely. It's designed to cripple Iran's main trading partners without firing a shot.
Yeah.
Yet, this tariff is specifically targeting China and Russia, two of Iran's largest trading partners and major players in the non-dollar trading sphere.
So it forces a choice.
It forces the world to choose between the U.S. and Iran. A 25% tariff on goods entering the massive U.S. market is designed to make doing business with Tehran economically suicidal for any major nation.
And the military threat has now moved from implicit warning to explicit declaration. The White House press secretary stated openly that President Trump is very good at always keeping all of his options on the table.
Which, in this context, is a clear signal that airstrikes are on the table. This is not diplomatic maneuvering aimed at deterrence.
No, this is an open threat of kinetic military action right after the failure of a covert op.
And the rhetoric supporting this is almost jubilant. I mean, look at Senator Lindsey Graham.
He explicitly laid out what we can call the minutia pitch make Iran great again.
He publicly said, "I pray and hope that 2026 will be the year that we make Iran great again."
And he advocated explicitly for a military invasion. No boots on the ground.
That phrase, "no boots on the ground," has a very dark history. It plays right into this hubristic idea, we saw it before the Iraq War, that the U.S. can easily depose a regime with standoff weapons and then be greeted as liberators.
But how feasible is a no-boots invasion of a country the size and capability of Iran?
It's not feasible, and that's what makes the strategy so dangerous. This idea that military action would be quick and decisive is what leads us to the conclusion that President Trump is adopting what is explicitly called the Israeli doctrine.
A policy pushed by advisors like Secretary of State Rubio and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Based on the principle of no diplomacy, just brute force and decapitation and regime change. It's a low-cost, high-risk strategy based on the assumption that Iran will just fold.
But the stakes are existential, and this military calculus ignores Iran's confirmed capacity for retaliation. What are the specific counter-threats being analyzed?
Well, Scott Ritter notes in his latest analysis that Iran's ballistic missile forces are now fully mobilized.
Ready to strike.
Ready to strike American military bases and Israel in response to any U.S. action. And he specifically warns that they have the capacity to cause profound damage because, and this is critical, many U.S. military bases in the region, particularly in the UAE and Qatar,
don't have any air defenses at all.
Exactly. We have massive concentrations of American personnel in completely exposed locations.
That capability fundamentally changes the calculus. The U.S. is banking on the idea that Iran will behave like smaller, weaker adversaries have absorbed the strike and not retaliate in kind.
But Iran has demonstrated a strategic capacity and willingness to defend itself and its allies, often through proxy networks. This is not Iraq in 2003.
And this raises the question of global stability. Professor Jeffrey Sachs has weighed in, warning that an attack on Iran inches the world closer to world war.
Because of the region's existing instability, the deep involvement of major powers like Russia and China, and the proliferation of military and nuclear arms nearby.
Colonel Douglas Macgregor, a former senior Pentagon advisor, echoes this.
He says unequivocally that a U.S. war on Iran risks triggering a world war because of the cascading effect it would have on these major allies who view Iran as a necessary economic partner. This is not a contained conflict. It's a potential global flashpoint.
And what's interesting is that Trump seems to take intense personal pride in these successful targeted operations like the Soleimani strike or the Baghdadi operation.
Oh, absolutely.
It contributes directly to his own image of strength and effectiveness. That psychological need for a decisive victory plays a huge role in this calculus.
And that psychological factor is key to understanding the next phase of our discussion. The precedent set by the administration's actions in Venezuela. They're viewing it not as a diplomatic success, but as a blueprint for executive impunity.
So the administration is openly viewing the Venezuela operation, the kidnapping of a sitting head of state, not as a risky international incident, but as a model of success.
Exactly. It reinforces the belief that the executive branch can act with total impunity, entirely unbound by international law or any checks from Congress.
Let's review the details of what the administration views as a big triumph: the kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro.
An operation they've privately called a ravishing success.
It involved specialized operational technology used by Delta Force, including advanced sonic waves deployed to cause illness and disorientation.
And to give you a technical sense, these weren't just loud noise generators. We're talking about directional energy weapons that leverage infrasound or microwave technology, similar to what was reportedly used against U.S. diplomats in Havana.
Causing those debilitating neurological symptoms.
Right. The ability to deploy such advanced non-kinetic weapons to destabilize a target's protective detail gives U.S. Special Forces a massive advantage in these regime change operations. It underscores the high level of technological sophistication involved.
And Trump's public bragging highlights this sense of impunity perfectly. He reportedly compared the Venezuela operation to the strikes against Soleimani and Baghdadi,
suggesting he genuinely believes adversaries won't react to such brazen breaches of international law, or, more importantly, that the domestic political costs will be minimal because the public views him as decisive.
The U.S. political establishment is actively promoting the idea that international law is something they can simply wipe their hands with. We've heard that from former White House senior advisor Stephen Miller and Senator Marco Rubio.
And the operation was supposedly justified by the economic windfall it would bring, specifically access to Venezuela's massive oil reserves. But this supposed triumph quickly runs into the reality of oligarchic interests being divided.
Yes, this is an intriguing source detail. One report details a meeting involving ExxonMobil. The corporation was reportedly uninterested in immediately investing the necessary tens of billions of dollars required to modernize Venezuela's severely deteriorated oil industry.
Their reluctance was directly attributed to the administration's volatility.
Which is a crucial point. It shows a clear clash within U.S. oligarchic interests. Regime change benefits them, yes, but not if the environment is too unstable for long-term capital deployment.
And Trump threatened to block Exxon from eventual deals because they wouldn't play ball immediately. But the fact remains, these multinational corporations are wary of investing massive capital in a volatile, unstable environment created by a president who is so erratic. Exxon's caution puts a real immediate damper on the massive economic windfall they promised.
The Venezuela operation provides the perfect backdrop to analyze the erosion of checks and balances here at home, this concept of the Imperial Presidency.
Right. And this unchecked executive power is encapsulated in the ongoing debate around the 1973 War Powers Act.
Senator Lindsey Graham is the loudest voice arguing that Congress should not clip President Trump's wings.
He calls the War Powers Act a power grab by the legislative branch against the commander-in-chief. He justifies this by citing the long history of presidents rejecting the act and the, 130 documented military operations conducted without full congressional approval since '73.
But that historical precedent doesn't excuse the sheer volume, speed, and danger of the unauthorized military operations we have seen in the last 12 months alone.
Not at all.
The quantity of recent military actions suggests the president treating the military as a tool for personal and political demonstrations, not strategic necessity.
The list is staggering.
Yeah.
It really needs to be fully appreciated.
Okay.
We're talking about multiple strikes in Somalia, Iraq, and Yemen, Operation Midnight Hammer in Iran, conducted without any congressional authorization or public disclosure, the Caribbean Sea operation.
And the Russian targets.
And incredibly confirmed strikes on 3 separate Russian targets in Syria, including what was identified as a nuclear command post at Valdai.
Striking a potential nuclear command post at Valdai, that is venturing far beyond historical norms of confrontation.
It absolutely is. Graham's logic, this imperial superiority argument, suggests that it's acceptable and within executive purview to antagonize and strike potential nuclear targets. This is venturing into dangerous territory that risks triggering a thermonuclear exchange.
The very existence of checks and balances is essential precisely to prevent one person from unilaterally risking world war.
Over what might be a political whim or a psychological drive.
And this whole issue of striking unannounced, often right after high-level talks, leads us directly to this cynical CIA and Mossad strategy, which we can call the propaganda of opportunity. We have multiple reports suggesting that the administration intentionally uses high-level good faith negotiations as a deliberate cover for planning military strikes.
It's a psychological warfare tactic. It happened with the kidnapping of Maduro, who was engaged in high-level talks with U.S. representatives just before the extraction.
Right.
And it happened dramatically with the failed 91 drone attack on President Putin's residence in Valdai.
Right. Scott Ritter notes that Trump used the sanctions negotiation talks with Russia as a setup.
He tried to create this artificial notion that sanctions could be lifted and relations restored, only to follow up with a brazen, humiliating demonstration of vulnerability. The drone strike was designed to create the impression that Putin is weak or easily distracted.
And the Russians subsequently made clear that they are reassessing their entire approach to negotiations with the U.S.
They're viewing diplomacy through a completely new, skeptical lens. And why wouldn't they?
The takeaway from Venezuela and the Iran threats seems clear. Diplomacy is viewed as a tool for setting up military strikes, not resolving conflict. The U.S. military establishment, aided by the intelligence community, is using force to achieve immediate goals, believing that their technical superiority means they don't have to consider the strategic what-then question.
Or the long-term cost to global stability. And this consolidation of unchecked power and the erosion of checks and balances abroad are running parallel to the intentional instigation of domestic chaos and the aggressive expansion of the security state here at home. This is where the convergence gets personal for you, the listener.
Let's turn to the shocking, chaotic events involving ICE agents in Minneapolis last week. This incident, where an ICE agent shot and killed an unarmed woman, Renee Good, who was allegedly trying to avoid having her car taken, it's become a national flashpoint.
It's a tailor-made culture war distraction.
The media coverage reveals the depth of the cultural division that the oligarchy actively benefits from. As you noted, the country is split into these social media bubbles where there's no reconciliation of fact.
None.
The political right is convinced she was a provocateur who violently resisted authority, trying to run over the officer. Meanwhile, the political left sees an innocent woman who was killed for no reason by an out-of-control federal agent.
And the truth, buried somewhere beneath all that sensationalism, is that a life was lost during a routine administrative action. An action the federal government is becoming increasingly comfortable executing with militarized force.
And the official endorsement of this violence is what should truly shock people. The former ICSU chief, Bovino, publicly congratulated the ICE agent,
stating the shooting was justified because the driver had intent, opportunity, and means. He even went so far as to call the 4,000-pound minivan a missile. That specific rhetoric is profoundly important. By calling the minivan a missile, Bovino is intentionally using language to dehumanize the driver and turn a civilian vehicle into a weapon of war. This justifies the use of lethal force in the eyes of the public and the political system.
And the political calculation here, including the possible pardon for the ICE officer, and maybe even for former police officer Derek Chauvin, is entirely consistent with Trump's reality TV background.
Oh, absolutely. He knows how to use chaos and shocking actions to push buttons and piss people off. It's all about creating the division that keeps the public occupied.
So the goal is to condition the public to accept escalating lethal violence from these paramilitary federal forces operating on our streets.
It is. But the escalation isn't just physical violence, it's technological. It's creating a pervasive surveillance apparatus that's moving far faster than our legal and civil liberties structures can handle.
We have definitive reports about this new surveillance apparatus being deployed by ICE right now.
This is deeply alarming, and the names of the systems need to be noted. The acquisition of the Weblock and Tangles surveillance systems by ICE. This is a major leap toward a true domestic surveillance state. These are powerful tools that allow the tracking of phones without a warrant.
So wait, how does that system actually bypass the Fourth Amendment and the warrant requirements?
It bypasses the warrant process by exploiting a massive commercial loophole. These systems don't directly hack the phones. Instead, they purchase commercial location data acquired from hundreds of millions of phones via a third-party company called Penlink. Penlink aggregates location data, the precise geographical coordinates of your phone, from data brokers, apps, and advertisers. Weblock and Tangles then analyze this commercial data to follow the phone's owner from work to home, tracking their movements over months, creating highly detailed life maps.
All legally outside the scope of traditional constitutional protections.
Because the government claims they are purchasing commercial information, not seizing private data.
That is a direct, warrantless invasion of privacy using commercially available data. It's weaponizing our digital footprint against us. And this is all being done under the guise of targeting illegal criminals or administrative violators.
And civil liberties experts are deeply alarmed. They view this as a concerted effort to get us to accept the surveillance state by normalizing its use against a marginalized population.
A classic slippery slope.
Exactly. They worry that today it's used for one specific population, but tomorrow it will be seamlessly applied against protected speech, political opponents, or anyone the government decides to investigate. It's the classic creep of government power. We saw this during the pandemic, right? New systems were introduced to track people who were supposedly meant to be locked down in their homes. This is how the surveillance state embeds itself and becomes permanent.
And crucially, state and local officials are pushing back legally and politically. This signals a major constitutional conflict over the limits of federal power. We're seeing lawsuits filed by the Attorney General and Governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, and Mayor Brandon Johnson in Chicago.
Mayor Johnson's rhetoric was profoundly strong. He described the ICE agents as occupiers, using unlawful tactics.
Occupiers.
And he specifically cited reports of them using chemical weapons against bystanders, including children and the elderly, during these aggressive street operations. These lawsuits are challenging the federal government's right to operate militarized forces within city boundaries, arguing that ICE is exceeding its mandate and violating local authority. It sets up a fundamental institutional conflict over who controls the streets of America.
This domestic chaos, the violence, the surveillance, the legal battles, it ties back to our core theme. The culture war is by design.
Absolutely. The oligarchy benefits because a civil war, or even the constant threat of one, prevents people from uniting to recognize the true enemy, the elites who control the debt and capital. By design, highly emotional, personalized issues like the Minneapolis shooting or debates around conflicts in Gaza become a culture war thing.
A thing to distract the populace from the looming economic collapse and the accelerating transfer of wealth upwards.
Precisely. And then we have the darkest allegation underpinning this elite control: the systematic use of blackmail to ensure compliance.
Which brings us back to the ongoing Epstein probe and the refusal of Bill and Hillary Clinton to testify, despite bipartisan subpoena support.
The reports we are analyzing emphasize that the central allegation here is not just a horrific crime of pedophilia, but something far larger and more strategic, a greater crime against the country of treason.
Treason.
The claim within these specific sources is that powerful people, including former presidents like Bill Clinton and, based on flight logs and association, Donald Trump, were allegedly compromised and blackmailed to do the bidding of a foreign Middle Eastern country, specifically Israel.
So the allegation is they have not been acting in America's long-term interest, but rather in the interest of a foreign power that holds compromising information over them.
That is the devastating claim. And the data points surrounding the Epstein case are relentless. We've seen documentation that Epstein was in the White House double the amount of time that one sitting congressperson was, over 9 years.
And Bill Clinton flew on Epstein's plane approximately 27 times after his presidency.
The public, and certainly the reports we're reviewing, are demanding to know: what was the leverage? How deeply compromised are the most powerful figures in our country?
The refusal to testify now escalates the legal confrontation dramatically.
It triggers the Clinton contempt process. If the House votes to hold the Clintons in contempt, the case is referred to the Justice Department, which then decides whether to pursue criminal prosecution. It's an escalating legal confrontation that touches the core of America's elite power structure, regardless of party affiliation.
Many observers note this is a both sides issue. They may disagree on taxes or abortion, but when it comes to empire and core security concerns like Israel, they are often perfectly aligned.
Due to deep-seated political pressure or, as is alleged here, blackmail.
We can't discuss the chaos abroad or at home without confronting the underlying economic reality that's forcing the hands of the oligarchy.
The U.S. economic system is, to put it mildly, under serious jeopardy, and the elites know the music is about to stop.
Let's lay out the hard data on economic instability, because this is the root of the problem. The U.S. national debt is currently $30 trillion and surging. Household debt is at an all-time high.
And job growth is essentially frozen. Fewer than 50,000 jobs created monthly since the administration took power. The economy is in a transitional, very messy, and clearly unsustainable phase.
And the administration's response to this fundamental crisis is not to address the debt, but to aggressively attack the independence of the Federal Reserve.
They are trying to destroy the independence and influence of Federal Chair Jerome Powell, whose term is ending by manufacturing a highly targeted investigation into construction cost overruns on a Fed building. This isn't about accountability.
No, it's designed solely to exert political pressure and undermine his legitimacy.
Right. And why the intense focus on Powell? because Trump is explicitly hammering the Federal Reserve to lower rates.
The goal is to temporarily save the economy and provide a short-term artificial boost leading into the next election cycle.
But the consensus view among global economists is that forcing rates lower under these specific circumstances signals a much weaker dollar ahead. Lowering rates when the debt is already at $30 trillion compromises the dollar's status as the global reserve currency.
It dramatically affects the underlying value of U.S. Treasury bonds,
which could trigger capital flight globally and accelerate the end of the dollar's dominance.
The political cost of this chaotic behavior is massive and, remarkably, extends to our closest historical allies. It signals a breakdown in the transatlantic framework. We have stunning reports that Denmark and Canada are actively preparing for a potential U.S. invasion or annexation of Greenland.
An invasion of Denmark's territory. It sounds absurd, but it reflects the level of fear and distrust Trump's volatility has generated.
Why Greenland?
Trump views Greenland as absolutely essential to round out the Western Hemisphere of influence because it's rich in critical minerals like copper and lithium. He sees resource acquisition as the key to economic dominance.
And the Europeans are trying to preempt this by offering to deploy more NATO troops there to assure Trump that Russia and China won't take control.
But analysts believe Trump isn't interested in that kind of assurance. He simply views possession as 9/10 of the law.
And the Canadian angle is even more disturbing.
Canada is reportedly preparing strategic documents on how they would defend themselves or respond if the U.S. military entered their territory as part of a move to annex Greenland or solidify border control to make it the 51st state. The erratic behavior is alienating even our closest partners. They are seeing instability where they once saw stability.
When we talk about this aggressive foreign policy and the budget that funds it, we have to examine the military-industrial complex that profits so immensely from this engineered chaos.
Bill Hartone, a leading expert on arms industry accountability, offers a powerful critique of the MIC and its tendency to build broken, yet wildly expensive weapons systems.
He details the extreme cost inefficiency that is gutting the taxpayer. For instance, a single new aircraft carrier costs $13 billion.
That's more than the entire Centers for Disease Control budget and twice the budget of the EPA.
And yet many experts believe this fixed, massive platform could be taken out by a modern, high-speed anti-ship missile costing a tiny fraction of that price.
The money is being poured into obsolete platforms that represent profit centers, not actual strategic capability.
And the examples of failure are truly staggering. The F-35 fighter jet, which is so complex and flawed, it's grounded for repair nearly half the time,
making it unavailable for missions. Or the Littoral combat ship, which was so flawed and unseaworthy that the only country that bought it was Japan, who subsequently grounded it immediately after receiving it due to continuous crashes and failures.
These are weapons that literally don't work reliably, yet they cost billions.
And furthermore, the cost disparity in current conflicts is economically unsustainable. Look at the conflict in Yemen. The U.S. military is using sophisticated $2 million missiles to strike modestly invested drones or small patrol boats used by adversaries like the Houthis.
So for every $100,000 drone destroyed, the U.S. taxpayer is spending $2 million on ordnance.
That cost differential is clearly unsustainable in a prolonged global conflict against low-cost asymmetrical threats. The MIC is designed for high-cost output, not battlefield efficiency.
But the profit motive, the traditional MIC, is now merging with a new, even more powerful threat, the technological elite. We're seeing the growing influence of tech billionaires like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who believe they are anointed to remake U.S. foreign policy.
They view war as a software problem to be optimized.
Right.
Thiel, in particular, speaks with a frightening conviction. He advocates for a unifying national mission. There should be a new Manhattan Project. Not to build a bomb, but to apply advanced technology directly to weapon systems, pushing for a permanent technological advantage over China.
So it's technological hubris combined with massive egos.
And these are people who operate entirely outside of any political accountability, dictating national defense strategy and pushing for war. His company, Palantir, famously held a board meeting in Israel and has software that is allegedly speeding up the rate at which targets can be bombed in conflicts.
This confluence of technological control, financial instability, and imperial overreach brings us to the ultimate synthesis of what we're observing, the shift in the global framework. We are moving beyond the traditional Pax Americana that has defined the post-war era.
If we look at the historical framework, global dominance is tied directly to financial power. The Glorious Revolution in 1688 and the creation of the Bank of England in 1694 established Pax Britannica,
Based on London's control of global trade.
which was eventually supplanted by Pax Americana after the World Wars based on the dollar and U.S. military power. Now, with the U.S. system burning, the debt surging, and the dollar under threat, capital is desperately seeking a safer, technologically secured place: Israel. This leads analysts to the concept of Pax Judaica.
So what defines this new paradigm, Pax Judaica, and how does it relate to the chaos we see today?
It's characterized by several specific interconnected factors. First, Israeli nuclear safety and dominance. Second, the deliberate elimination of regional competitors. Iraq, Libya, and Syria have been burned down, and Iran is clearly next on the list.
No, third.
The creation of a global surveillance state based on proprietary Israeli technology and U.S. tech partners. The belief among these oligarchs is that they were unable to successfully establish a total unconstrained surveillance state in the U.S. during moments like the pandemic, but they can achieve it through technological centralization and geopolitical alignment elsewhere. It's capital consolidating its power base.
Its shift in capital and control is reinforced by the economic analysis of the former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis. He argues that we have actually exited capitalism entirely and entered a new system he calls techno-feudalism.
It is a profound claim that changes how we must view the economy. Varoufakis explains that we are no longer living in a system where capital owners, capitalists, extract profit by owning the means of production, like a factory.
So what are they doing instead?
Instead, the tech brolyarchs, representing new technofidal money, they extract rents via cloud capital, not profits.
Explain that difference between profits and rents, because that feels like the defining characteristic of this new order.
Right. In capitalism, if a company builds a better widget, they earn a profit through competition and production. In techno-feudalism, the tech oligarchs, an elite 0.00001%, don't necessarily produce anything tangible. They control the digital infrastructure. Cloud capital is the platform.
Like Amazon Web Services, Google, Facebook.
Exactly. That's the new land. And they charge rent for access to this land. If you want to sell a product, you have to use their platform, their search engine, their cloud service. They extract value merely by controlling what we think, what we search, and what we buy.
Giving them immense, centralized power far beyond traditional capitalist competition.
So they're not productive machines. They are machines that extract value and empower this ultra-elite class by controlling information flow. They're effectively making us serfs who pay rent on the digital land that they own.
The entire system is shifting beneath our feet. And the chaos we see, both domestically with ICE and abroad with the push toward war with Iran, is merely the mechanism used by the custodians of the old order to fight desperately to determine the shape of the new one.
They need the distraction of cultural and military conflict, while the global financial tectonic plates shift into techno-feudalism and Pax Judaica.
As we conclude this intensive deep dive, the one thing you need to remember for the rest of the week is this. The chaos witnessed this week, from the domestic violence of federal agents and the alarming new surveillance capabilities being deployed via Weblock and Tangles, to the open threat of a major war against Iran and the simultaneous erosion of congressional checks and balances, is not random. It is not political incompetence. It is part of a calculated political strategy designed to accelerate geopolitical shifts and consolidate elite power both domestically and abroad, using fear, division, and technological control as the core propellant.
And building on that idea of techno-feudalism and the U.S. debt crisis, if the current system requires perpetual war and engineered chaos to sustain the oligarchy's control and prevent internal revolution, we have to confront the moral cost for the average citizen. We are witnessing a desperate fight to control the future, and the vast majority of citizens are viewed by these elites as merely a soldier to fight their culture wars, or worse, a serf to pay rent to their cloud capital. The collapse of the old order is underway, and its custodians are fighting desperately to determine the shape of the new one, expecting the public to pay the price in blood and freedom, with their movements tracked every step of the way.
If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.